There comes a point in life when being capable is no longer enough. You can be thoughtful, skilled, disciplined, reliable. You can do good work in silence. You can carry more than people realize. You can keep your word, keep your head down, and keep moving. And still, somehow, your life begins to feel smaller than the person living inside it, not because you lack ability, not because the world is against you, but because somewhere along the way, you learned how to reduce your visible strength. You learned how to soften your opinions before they left your mouth. You learned how to delay your best ideas until they felt safer. You learned how to wait for perfect timing, better conditions, stronger confidence, a clearer sign. And while you were waiting, as someone less prepared but more decisive kept stepping into rooms you were qualified to enter. This happens quietly. That is why so many people miss it. They think the problem is talent. They think the problem is luck. They think the problem is that other people are naturally more magnetic, more persuasive, more built for visibility. But in many cases, the deeper issue is simpler and harder to confront. They have trained themselves to think within the size of their current life. And once a person does that for long enough, caution starts to look like wisdom. Delay starts to look like discipline. Hesitation starts to feel intelligent. But beneath all of it is a quieter truth, a painful one. You may not be living at the edge of your ability. You may be living at the edge of your comfort with being seen. That changes everything. But because the moment you understand that, the conversation is no longer about raw potential. It becomes a conversation about identity, about self-permission, about the internal ceiling that keeps a strong mind performing like a doubtful one. There are people who speak with less insight than you and get heard. People who start before they are ready and build momentum, while others build excuses. People who walk into a room without extraordinary gifts, yet something in their posture, pace, and certainty makes the room register them. This is not magic. It is not manipulation. And it is not a personality type reserved for the loud. It is the result of congruence. Their thoughts are not apologizing for their ambition. Their actions are not arguing with their intentions. Their body is not broadcasting retreat while their words claim commitment. They are visible because they are aligned. And most people are ignored not because they are unimpressive, but because they are divided. One part of them wants expansion. Another part wants safety. One part wants recognition. Another part fears the weight that recognition brings. One part wants to move boldly. Another part keeps negotiating with uncertainty, asking for reassurance no real life ever fully provides. So, they stay half committed, half expressed, half seen, and then they wonder why the world responds to them in fractions. This is where the real shift begins. Not with louder speech, not with performance, not with forcing confidence onto a nervous mind. It begins the day you realize that thinking bigger is not about fantasy. It is not about inflated self-talk. It is not about pretending you are destined for something special while doing very little to carry that belief into behavior. Thinking bigger means you stop using your current circumstances as the final measurement of your range. It means you stop treating the present version of your life as proof of your permanent limits. It means you begin asking better questions. Not, what can I manage without risk? But, what would I build if I trusted myself to grow into the weight of it? Not, how do I avoid being judged? But, what becomes possible when I stop organizing my life around other people's temporary opinions? Not, what if I fail publicly? But, what if staying small is the more expensive mistake? Because it often is. Because there is a cost to prolonged hesitation that rarely shows up all at once. It appears in the opportunity you almost took, the message you almost sent, the skill you almost developed seriously, the standard you almost held, the room you almost entered, the version of yourself that keeps appearing in flashes, then disappearing the moment boldness is required. That cost accumulates, quietly, over years. And eventually, the heaviest thing a person carries is not failure. It is unused force. Unused force turns inward. It becomes frustration without language, restlessness without direction, irritation at small things, a sense that something is off, even when life looks fine from a distance. Because human beings can endure difficulty with surprising strength when they feel honest in the way they are living. But it becomes much harder to endure comfort when comfort is purchased by self-betrayal. This is why some people feel tired, not because they are doing too much, but because they are suppressing too much. Suppressing initiative, suppressing standards, suppressing ambition, suppressing the instinct to step forward. And the body feels that conflict. The mind feels it too. You can sense when your life is being lived below its natural voltage. So, this audiobook is not about becoming louder for attention. It is about becoming clearer in a way attention naturally follows. It is about developing a mind that can hold larger goals without shrinking from them. A nervous system that can remain steady while taking meaningful risks. A presence that comes not from domination, but from self-respect. Or because people tend to notice what is internally settled. They notice the person who is not constantly seeking permission from the room. They notice the one whose words are measured because the mind behind them is measured. They notice the one who is not rushing to impress because they are no longer trapped in proving. That kind of presence does not beg for recognition, it generates it. And that matters. Not for vanity, for impact. Because there are ideas that remain trapped in people who are too cautious to voice them. There are careers that stall because their owners wait to feel fearless. There are relationships weakened by unclear standards. There are teams, families, businesses, communities, and futures shaped by the fact that capable people often underestimate the authority of a regulated, decisive mind. You do not need to become someone unnatural. You do not need to copy the energy of aggressive people. You do not need to wear boldness as a costume. You need to become more honest about the scale of your actual potential and more disciplined about acting in proportion to it. That is different. It is cleaner, more stable, more sustainable. Because borrowed intensity fades, but earned self-trust deepens. And self-trust is the foundation of everything this journey asks of you. If you do not trust yourself, every larger move feels reckless. If you do not trust yourself, every ambitious goal feels like an emotional gamble. If you do not trust yourself, visibility feels dangerous because you assume one setback will define you. But when self-trust begins to build, the entire experience changes. Then boldness is no longer dramatic. It becomes procedural. You make the call, you state the standard, you ask the larger question, you submit the stronger work, you enter the room. You tolerate the discomfort of being new, stretched, evaluated, incomplete, and you keep going. That is how people become hard to ignore. Not in one performance, in repeated contact with discomfort that no longer controls them. That is what others feel when they say someone has presence. They are often sensing nervous system stability, integrity between thought and action. A person no longer leaking energy through over-explaining, second-guessing, apologizing, and retreating. A person whose internal message has become simple. I am here. I am prepared. I do not need to force this, but I will not hide either. That message lands. It lands in conversation, in leadership, and in creative work, in negotiation, in conflict, in silence, especially in silence. Because when a person stops scrambling for approval, their stillness starts speaking for them. And stillness, when backed by substance, has weight. This is the deeper reframe. You do not become hard to ignore by chasing visibility. you become hard to ignore by becoming difficult to dismiss in your own mind. Once that happens, your behavior changes. Your decisions sharpen. Your voice slows down. Your standards rise. You stop decorating weak commitments with strong language. You stop confusing private potential with lived capacity. You stop waiting to be chosen in places where you should already be building. And with each move, life begins answering you differently. Not because the world suddenly becomes fair, but because clarity is easier to respond to than hesitation. This is where we begin. At the threshold between the life that fits your fear and the life that fits your strength. At the point where you stop asking whether you are allowed to expand and start training yourself to carry expansion well. You do not need perfect confidence to begin. You need honesty. You need steadiness. You need a willingness to stop protecting the smaller version of yourself simply because it feels familiar. There is more in you than your current patterns reveal. More range, more courage, more precision, more authority. But none of it becomes real while it remains unexpressed. So now the real work starts. Not to become someone artificial, not to become intimidating, not to become obsessed with attention, but to become larger in thought, both cleaner in action, bolder in movement, and stronger in presence. To become a person whose energy is not wasted in self-reduction. To become a person whose actions can carry the size of their mind. To become quietly and unmistakably hard to ignore. Next, I'm building Section 1 as a full spoken chapter with a gradual rise in intensity and practical reframing. Then I'll stop exactly at the section break. The first mistake most people make is smaller than it looks. They do not aim too low because they are lazy. They aim too low because low aims feel easier to emotionally manage. A smaller goal creates a smaller threat. A smaller move creates a smaller chance of embarrassment. A smaller vision asks less of the nervous system. It asks less of identity. It asks less of courage. And because of that, many intelligent people build lives around emotional convenience while telling themselves they are being realistic. That word, realistic, has protected countless forms of hesitation. It has protected postponed work, underplayed ambition, underdeveloped skill, unspoken standards. It has given polished language to private fear. Now, realism matters. It matters because fantasy without discipline creates delusion. But there is another kind of distortion people rarely question. It is the distortion of treating your current confidence level as if it were an objective measurement of your actual capacity. Those are not the same thing. Confidence is often delayed evidence. It usually grows after repeated action, not before it. Capacity, on the other hand, can exist long before the mind feels calm enough to use it fully. This means a person can be capable and still behave small. They can have range and still live in reduction. They can have the mind for a larger life while continuing to make decisions from an older, narrower self-concept. That is why thinking bigger is not an exercise in ego. It is an exercise in honest calibration. It is the discipline of asking whether the size of your decisions matches the size of your developed potential. In many cases, it does not. And the evidence is subtle. You hear it in how people speak about their plans. They say things like, "I'm just trying to see what happens. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm keeping expectations low." On the surface, this sounds grounded, modest, mature. But very often buried inside that language is a preemptive retreat, like a person trying to protect themselves from disappointment by lowering the altitude of effort before the climb has even begun. That protection feels smart in the short term. In the long term, it becomes a pattern of self-limitation, because the mind adapts to the standard it repeats. If you repeatedly downplay what you want, eventually your behavior will organize around that smaller frame. Your schedule will reflect it. Your work ethic will reflect it. The quality of your questions will reflect it. Even your posture and opportunity will reflect it. You will approach life not as someone building, but as someone cautiously auditioning. And the world responds differently to builders than it does to people who are merely testing whether they are allowed. This is one of the quiet laws of human behavior. Okay, people tend to take your internal standard as information. If you speak like your ideas are optional, they will often be treated that way. If you present yourself as uncertain about your value, people may not know where to place you. If your actions suggest that even you do not fully believe in your direction, it becomes harder for others to orient themselves around your seriousness. This does not mean you need to become theatrical. It does not mean inflating your self-image or pretending certainty you do not possess. It means your behavior needs to start carrying a stronger internal vote. That vote is simple. My effort deserves full form. My ideas deserve clear expression. My standards deserve protection. My growth deserves seriousness. That internal vote changes a person. Not instantly, but steadily. Because once you begin thinking from that level, a new tension appears. You start to notice where your life is misaligned with what you claim to want. You notice the half-finished projects, the soft boundaries, the diluted communication, the way you rehearse stronger decisions in private, then perform smaller ones in public. You notice how often your intelligence is being used not to create momentum, but to justify delay. That realization can sting, but it is useful, because pain, when interpreted correctly, is often a sign of inconsistency between what you know and how you live. And this is where bold movement begins, not with drama, with correction. Boldness, in its most durable form, is simply the willingness to act in a way that matches a clearer truth. It is not recklessness. It is not aggression. It is not speed for its own sake. It is congruent motion. Motion that reflects a larger internal decision. That is why some people look bold even when they are quiet. Their boldness is not in volume. It is in lack of self-betrayal. They say the necessary thing. They send the proposal. They ask the more ambitious question. They step into higher responsibility work. They stop volunteering confusion where clarity is required. They stop waiting to feel exempt from discomfort. That last point matters. Many people delay action because they assume discomfort is a sign they are moving too fast or reaching too far. But discomfort is often just the body's response to unfamiliar exposure. It does not automatically mean the move is wrong. In many cases, it means the move is new. A bigger room feels different. A stronger standard feels different. A more visible attempt feels different. Of course it does. The body likes what it recognizes. The mind likes what it can predict. So when you begin operating above your previous normal, there may be internal resistance. Doubt may increase for a while. Self-consciousness may increase. Fatigue may even increase in the beginning. Not because growth is failing, but because adaptation is costly. This is where many people retreat too early. They interpret the friction of eccentric expansion as evidence against expansion, and so they shrink back to the familiar, not because the familiar is better, but because it is easier to regulate. But the life you want may require a different relationship with internal discomfort. You may need to stop treating every elevated heartbeat as a warning. You may need to stop assuming that uncertainty means you are unqualified. You may need to learn that pressure in measured doses is not your enemy. It is part of the mechanism through which hidden capacity becomes usable. Think of the difference between a person who waits to feel completely ready and a person who trains themselves to become ready through exposure. The first person may remain thoughtful, even admirable, but limited by hesitation. The second person grows range. They learn that the mind can steady itself after speaking up, that the body can survive visibility. That feedback, even difficult feedback, is not fatal. That skill compounds faster when tested in public reality rather than protected in private imagination. This is one reason bigger thinking must be connected to bolder movement. On its own, big thinking can become a refined form of self-entertainment. A person can think in large concepts for years and still remain behaviorally small. They can consume ideas about courage, identity, influence, leadership, excellence, and never translate those concepts into lived structure. Then the gap widens. The gap between who they could become and who they are rehearsing daily. That gap has psychological consequences. It can create bitterness, impatience, envy toward those who move, a sense of being overlooked. But often what hurts most is not being overlooked by the world. It is being overlooked by oneself. It is the private knowledge that you have not fully backed your own development. So the shift begins here. You stop admiring qualities from a distance and begin installing them through practice. Notice, if you want a stronger presence, your speech must become cleaner. If you want more respect, your standards must become more visible. If you want greater opportunity, your level of initiative must become harder to ignore. If you want a larger life, your daily behavior must stop negotiating with every passing emotion. This is practical, not abstract. Thinking bigger may mean you no longer build plans around worst-case scenarios. It may mean you stop asking only what is safe and start asking what is worthy. It may mean you commit to producing work of a quality that can change your trajectory rather than merely maintain your current place. It may mean taking your skill seriously enough to refine it beyond the point of convenience. It may mean having the difficult conversation rather than carrying the slow resentment. It may mean choosing visible responsibility over protected anonymity. These are not flashy acts, but repeated over time, they alter identity. And identity is everything here, because people often try to act boldly while still secretly identifying as fragile, secondary, or replaceable. That creates a split. The body moves forward, but the self-concept keeps pulling backward. Then even small acts of courage feel exhausting because the inner system is arguing with the outer behavior. At some point, the inner description must change, not into arrogance, into self-respect. You begin to see yourself as someone who can learn under pressure, someone who can remain decent without becoming passive, someone who can be measured without becoming timid, someone who can be ambitious without becoming reckless, someone who can hold a bigger standard and grow into it through repetition. This is how a stronger identity is built, not from slogans, from evidence. You keep promises to yourself. You complete difficult things. You tolerate short-term awkwardness for long-term alignment. You recover from mistakes without collapsing into self-doubt. You become a person your own mind can take more seriously. And once that happens, something important shifts. You stop asking, "How do I look bold?" You start asking, "What would a serious version of me do next?" That question is quieter, stronger, more useful, because it redirects attention away from image and back to behavior. And behavior, repeated long enough, becomes reputation, first in your own eyes, then in the eyes of others. That is where hard-to-ignore presence starts to emerge. But not from seeking attention, but from accumulating proof. Proof that you can think on a larger scale without drifting into fantasy. Proof that you can move with courage without becoming reckless. Proof that your ambition has structure. Proof that your words and actions are beginning to agree. When that agreement becomes visible, people feel it. They may not describe it precisely, but they notice. They notice the steadier voice, the cleaner decisions, the reduced hesitation, the higher standard. The person who is no longer asking life to shrink down to the size of bold fear, and that is where your next chapter begins. Not when the world announces your arrival, when you stop waiting for permission to take yourself seriously. There is a moment often missed when a person begins to outgrow the life they have built. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. Their name has not changed. Their job may not have changed. Their environment may look exactly the same from the outside. They still wake up in the same room, answer the same messages, face the same deadlines, walk through the same ordinary routines. But inside, something has become harder to ignore. The old pace no longer feels honest. The old explanations no longer feel convincing. The old version of discipline, the one built mostly around endurance, starts to feel incomplete, because endurance alone is not enough. A person can endure a mediocre standard for years. A person can endure under-recognition, endure weak environments, endure unclear relationships, endure work that no longer stretches them, endure patterns that once protected them, but now quietly confine them. Human beings are remarkably capable of enduring what they should eventually outgrow. That is why growth demands more than patience. It demands discernment. You need to know the difference between a season that requires resilience and a pattern that requires departure. You need to know the difference between healthy humility and self-erasure. You need to know the difference between being grounded and being afraid to claim more. That difference is not always obvious at first, because a smaller life can still be busy. It can still be respectable. It can still look disciplined from a distance. And that is what makes it dangerous. People often assume that if they are working hard, they must be moving in the right direction. But effort alone is not proof of alignment. Whilst a person can spend enormous energy maintaining structures that no longer fit who they are becoming, that creates a particular kind of exhaustion, not the exhaustion of meaningful strain, the exhaustion of internal contradiction. You are doing things, but your deeper mind is unconvinced. You are productive, but not fully directed. You are responsible, but not yet expressed. You are present, but not fully engaged with the size of your own capacity. That state wears people down. It makes them duller in conversation, less decisive in action, more easily discouraged, because unused potential does not sit quietly forever. It creates friction. It produces a faint but persistent signal that something in your current approach is no longer sufficient. But many people respond to that signal by trying to become more efficient at the wrong scale. They organize better, optimize harder, add stricter routines, consume more advice, refine the edges. But they do not question the core. They do not ask whether the framework itself has become too small. They do not ask whether their goals are outdated, whether their environment is under-challenging, whether their current identity is built around surviving an earlier chapter rather than serving the next one. And because they do not ask those questions, they keep polishing a container they should be preparing to outgrow. This is where bigger thinking becomes a form of honesty. It is not simply imagining more. It is admitting that your current way of operating may no longer be an adequate vessel for the person you are trying to become. But that admission has weight, because once you see it, you have a responsibility, not a theatrical responsibility, a quiet one. You can no longer hide behind the language of later with the same innocence. You can no longer pretend you do not know what is being underexpressed in you. You can no longer act as though your hesitation is purely rational when you have already felt the deeper cost of staying the same. And that is when fear often becomes more sophisticated. At first, fear is obvious. It says, do not try, do not risk, do not expose yourself. Later, once a person matures, fear becomes more intelligent. It borrows the language of timing, maturity, and nuance. It says, wait until the plan is complete. Wait until your confidence stabilizes. Wait until the environment improves. Wait until your doubts disappear. Wait until you have one more credential, one more connection, one more sign that the move will be received well. It sounds thoughtful, but often it is still fear, only better dressed. This matters because if fear speaks in crude language, it is easier to reject. If fear speaks in refined language, it can sit at the table of your decision-making for years. And during those years, life keeps moving. Others develop range. Others make imperfect attempts and improve through contact with reality. Others build relationships, skills, businesses, bodies of work, and reputations through motion. Meanwhile, the overcautious person keeps preparing for a version of certainty that rarely arrives in full. So, a difficult but necessary reframe must happen. Readiness is not a feeling you wait for. Readiness is often a condition you build by entering the demand. You become more articulate by speaking, more resilient by being tested, more visible by tolerating visibility, more credible by carrying responsibility, more grounded by facing pressure and discovering you can remain intact within it. This is why bold movement must be practical. Otherwise, it becomes a slogan. Bold movement may look like volunteering for the harder assignment, even when your voice shakes a little. It may look like telling the truth earlier instead of after weeks of private frustration. It may look like increasing the quality threshold of your work when nobody has yet required it of you. It may look like refusing to keep shrinking your language around what you actually want. It may look like asking for the meeting, making the pitch, short of publishing the work, leaving the weak environment, setting the firmer boundary, learning the uncomfortable skill, stepping forward before your identity has fully caught up. And yes, these moves cost something. They cost comfort. They cost old narratives. They cost the temporary safety of being underestimated. That last one matters more than people realize. Being underestimated can feel painful, but it can also become strangely comforting. If little is expected of you, little can be demanded. If people do not fully see your range, you are protected from the pressure of living at that range consistently. So some people unconsciously participate in their own under-recognition. They do not speak clearly. They do not claim responsibility. They do not bring their strongest thinking forward. And then they resent the fact that no one fully registers them. This is difficult to confront, but useful, because once you see your own participation in the pattern, you regain leverage. You stop waiting for others to notice what you have not fully expressed. You stop resenting the world for failing to infer your seriousness. You begin making seriousness legible. That does not mean becoming louder or more self-promotional than your nature supports. It means becoming unmistakable in the places that matter. Your preparation becomes undeniable. Your communication becomes more precise. Your standards stop fluctuating with your mood. Your work stops carrying the scent of hesitation. Your decisions become less apologetic. You stop hiding your ambition behind casual language. And when that happens, then something profound begins to change inside you. Self-respect becomes more physical. It shows up in your timing. You pause before speaking instead of rushing to justify yourself. You finish the task properly instead of leaving it almost done. You make the difficult call before the day ends instead of carrying it as background tension. You remove avoidable disorder from your life because disorder quietly trains the mind to accept a lower standard. You become more deliberate with energy, attention, and speech. That level of self-respect is not vanity. It is the structural basis of presence. Presence is often misunderstood as charm. In reality, presence is frequently the byproduct of internal organization. A person whose thoughts are not fighting their actions has more available force. A person whose values are not constantly being traded for temporary comfort has more steadiness. A person who has stopped making small retreats in 10 unnoticed ways each day begins to feel different, even in silence. Others register that, not because the person is performing importance, but because their energy is no longer fragmented. Fragmentation is expensive. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you fragment. Every time you pretend not to care about something that deeply matters to you, you fragment. Every time you reduce your effort because you are afraid strong effort might reveal a gap, you fragment. Every time you speak from self-protection instead of clarity, you fragment. These are not minor moments. Repeated daily, they shape identity. They train the mind to associate safety with self-reduction. And then when a larger moment arrives, the system is unprepared. Not because you lacked intelligence, because you practiced retreat. So the work now is not merely to become more motivated. Motivation rises and falls. The deeper work is to become less divided between what you know and what you do, less divided between your values and your behavior, less divided between your ambition and your willingness to pay the emotional cost of pursuing it. This is what people mean, often without naming it, when they speak of personal power. Not force over others, not dominance. Coherence. The ability to bring your mind, speech, standards, and actions into stronger alignment. Coherence makes you easier to trust, easier to follow, easier to remember, and harder to ignore. Because incoherence leaks signal. It makes even strong people appear uncertain. It makes effort look weaker than it is. It muddies impact. But coherence sharpens everything. A coherent person can say fewer words and leave a stronger impression. They can make one move and create more momentum than someone else creates through 10 half-committed attempts. They can withstand more pressure because less of their energy is being spent on internal contradiction. That is why the next phase of growth is not simply about going bigger externally. It is about becoming more integrated internally. Ask yourself, where am I still speaking below my actual clarity? Where am I carrying standards privately that I do not embody publicly? Where am I waiting to be fully comfortable before acting on what I already know? These questions matter because they reveal the exact points where your larger life is being delayed, not destroyed. Delayed. And delays can become habits if left unchallenged. So challenge them. Begin in concrete ways. Complete the task you keep circling. State the boundary you keep softening. Submit the work you keep over-preparing. Ask the question you keep editing down. Raise the standard in one visible area of life and hold it long enough for your identity to feel the shift. Do not try to transform everything at once. That often creates drama without depth. Choose the points of highest return. The behaviors that would send the clearest signal to your own mind that a more serious chapter has begun. Then repeat. That repetition is how a stronger self-concept becomes believable, not through imagination alone. Through lived proof. You act, recover, learn, refine, act again. And gradually your nervous system stops interpreting boldness as danger. It starts interpreting it as part of who you are becoming. That is the threshold, the point where growth stops being an abstract preference and becomes a behavioral standard. The point where you no longer ask whether a bigger life would be nice, but whether you are willing to become the kind of person who can hold it well. That question changes the room inside you, because now the issue is no longer talent. It is no longer hidden potential. It is no longer what you might do one day. It is whether you will continue rehearsing a smaller identity when a stronger one is already asking to be lived. By the time most people decide they want a larger life, they are not dealing with one obstacle. They are dealing with layers. The visible layer is external. More responsibility, more competition, more pressure, more exposure, more demand. That is the part people talk about because it is easy to describe. But beneath it is another layer that determines, far more than most realize, the internal cost of expansion. Not the fantasy of it, the cost. Because every larger chapter asks something from you that the smaller chapter did not. It asks for a stronger relationship with uncertainty, a cleaner relationship with discomfort, a more disciplined relationship with emotion, a more honest relationship with time. And if those relationships remain weak, a person can want more with great sincerity and still sabotage the process in quiet ways. This is why bold movement often breaks down at the point of emotional friction, but not because the goal was wrong, not because the person lacked talent, because the inner system was not yet trained to hold the weight of sustained exposure. A person says they want to be taken seriously, but they still collapse inward the moment they are misunderstood. They say they want greater influence, but they still over-explain every decision because they fear disapproval. They say they want a bigger career, a bigger body of work, a bigger voice, but their daily schedule still belongs to distraction, low-value obligations, and moods that are treated as commands. This is not a moral failure, it is a structural one. Their ambition has not yet been given a container strong enough to protect it, and without that container, even a powerful desire leaks away. This is why thinking bigger can never remain purely mental. It must become architectural. You have to build a life that can support a stronger version of you. That means your days cannot remain casual if your goals are not casual. Your attention cannot remain scattered if your work requires depth. Your standards cannot remain negotiable if you are trying to become reliable under pressure. Your emotional life cannot remain unexamined if every major opportunity will test your ability to stay steady in the presence of uncertainty. This is where many people hesitate, because the truth is demanding. They would like a larger result without a larger structure. They would like stronger recognition without stronger habits. They would like a more powerful identity without the repetitive, sometimes unglamorous disciplines that make that identity credible. But life tends to respond to what is embodied, not merely desired. And embodiment is built through repetition, not dramatic repetition, specific repetition. You wake when you said you would wake. You begin before your mood fully cooperates. You finish the work to the standard you know it requires. You return to the hard thing again after a mediocre attempt, instead of using imperfection as permission to retreat. You keep your language clear even when the room is uncertain. You choose consistency over emotional theater. At first, these acts seem small, but they are not small to the nervous system. They are signals. Signals that you are becoming someone less easily ruled by drift. That matters because drift is one of the great thieves of a larger life, not catastrophe. Drift. Catastrophe is obvious. Drift is subtle. When it happens when vague intentions replace decisions, when days become reactive, when effort fragments across too many concerns, when a person tells themselves they are still on the path simply because they remain busy. Busyness can be deeply deceptive. A scattered person may feel intense and accomplished while making very little meaningful forward movement. They answer messages, handle minor tasks, solve surface problems, rearrange logistics, adjust plans, consume more information, and by evening, they are exhausted. Yet, the one thing that would actually move their life remains untouched. This is not just a productivity issue. It is a psychological one, because each day that your best energy goes somewhere beneath your real priority, your self-trust weakens a little. Not always consciously, but the mind notices. It notices what you claim matters and what you actually protect with time, focus, and seriousness. If those two do not match, confidence begins to erode. And that erosion is dangerous because it looks like a motivation problem from the outside. In reality, it is often a credibility problem within the self. Your own mind stops believing your declarations. You say this matters, but your calendar says otherwise. You say you are committed, but your routines remain soft. You say you are ready for a larger chapter, but your attention is still available to everything except the work that chapter requires. That gap must close, and it closes not through intensity alone, but through design. The serious version of you needs systems, not rigid systems for the sake of control. Protective systems, boundaries around your best hours, but reduced access to distraction. Clear criteria for what deserves your effort and what does not. A repeatable process for beginning, even when you feel resistance. A method for reviewing your own behavior without slipping into self-attack. These structures matter because willpower is uneven. Discipline is more stable when it is supported by environment, rhythm, and clarity. This is one of the quieter truths about powerful people. Many do not rely on constant inspiration. They rely on structures that reduce unnecessary negotiation. They do not wake up each day asking whether they feel like becoming who they said they wanted to become. They already decided. And now the structure carries part of the load. This is where life begins to change in a way others can feel, because a person with structure moves differently. They do not radiate urgency all the time. They are often calmer than before, more selective, less emotionally available to trivial disruption. Their mind has somewhere to go. Their energy has a hierarchy. Their days are not perfect, but they are no longer random. And randomness is incompatible with depth. If you are serious about becoming hard to ignore, then you must become harder to distract. That line is worth staying with, because attention is not merely a mental resource. It is identity in motion. What you repeatedly attend to shapes your internal climate. It shapes the quality of your decisions, the depth of your work, the speed of your growth, and the emotional tone of your life. A distracted mind often lives in shallow contact with its own potential. It samples instead of builds. It reacts instead of directs. It confuses stimulation with progress. That pattern is especially costly in an age where interruption is constant and frictionless. Every platform, every feed, every update, every low-stakes invitation to scatter can train the mind away from sustained depth. And when that happens for long enough, bold movement starts to feel harder, not because you are incapable, but because your mind has lost some of its endurance for unbroken focus. That endurance can be rebuilt, but rebuilding it requires restraint. You may need to disappoint the part of you that wants novelty every hour. You may need to reduce the amount of noise you treat as normal. You may need to spend more time in quiet, not as an escape, but as a training ground for clearer thought, because bigger thinking rarely emerges from chronic mental clutter. It often emerges when a person has enough internal space to hear their own sharper judgments again. In quiet, you begin to notice what is diluted, what is overdue, what is beneath your standard, what requires courage. Quiet can be uncomfortable for that reason. It removes the protective fog of constant input. But that is exactly why it is valuable. It returns you to yourself. And once you return to yourself, another task becomes unavoidable. Selection. A larger life is built as much by what you stop feeding as by what you start building. You stop feeding weak commitments. Stop feeding performative busyness. Stop feeding relationships that are built on your self-reduction. Stop feeding habits that make you feel immediately relieved, but progressively smaller. Stop feeding identities that were shaped in a chapter you have already outgrown. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming exact. More exact with your time. More exact with your standards. More exact with the environments you tolerate. More exact with the thoughts you keep rehearsing. Because repeated thought becomes emotional atmosphere, and emotional atmosphere becomes behavioral pattern. If your mind is constantly rehearsing smallness, caution, comparison, and self-doubt, then even strong opportunities will arrive in a weakened internal environment. So, a serious person learns to audit the mental climate. What am I repeatedly telling myself about risk? What narrative do I keep returning to when I am challenged? Do I see pressure as proof I am inadequate, or as the terrain where skill becomes real? Do I keep interpreting visibility as danger? Do I secretly believe stronger people are somehow different in kind, rather than different in training? These questions matter because hidden assumptions shape visible behavior. If you assume boldness belongs to other people, you will hesitate at the threshold. If you assume mistakes permanently stain you, you will avoid the repetitions that make mastery possible. If you assume larger ambitions make you exposed in a dangerous way, you will unconsciously build a life that protects you from expansion. That is why practical growth must include psychological reframing. You are not training yourself to eliminate fear. You are training yourself to stop treating fear as final authority. You are not training yourself to avoid uncertainty. You are training yourself to move with intelligence inside it. You are not training yourself to become flawless. You are training yourself to remain coherent while imperfect and visible. That is a much stronger aim, because flawless people do not exist. Coherent people do. And coherence is what carries weight. It allows a person to remain stable in motion, to make the call with incomplete information, to speak with conviction while remaining open to refinement, to recover from missteps without identity collapse, to continue even when the work is not yet being rewarded at the level it deserves. That last part is crucial. Many people can work hard for a short period when encouragement is obvious. Far fewer can continue with dignity and sharpness when results are delayed. But in many meaningful pursuits, a delay is part of the process. Recognition lags. Skill compounds invisibly for a while. Reputation builds slowly, then suddenly becomes visible. If your motivation depends entirely on immediate response, your range will remain fragile. So, you must learn another form of fuel: respect for the process, respect for the craft, respect for the person you are becoming in the repetition. When that fuel deepens, your relationship with effort changes. You no longer treat disciplined action as a temporary sacrifice. You begin to see it as the language of self-respect, and that changes the emotional texture of work. It becomes less dramatic, more grounded, less about proving, more about building, less about chasing moments, more about constructing a life that can hold meaningful scale. This is the turn, the point where ambition matures, the point where you stop wishing for bigger outcomes and begin building the structure, focus, and inner steadiness those outcomes demand. That is how boldness becomes sustainable. That is how thinking bigger leaves the realm of imagination and enters behavior. That is how a person stops living like a possibility and starts living like a force under construction. At a certain stage, the work becomes less about starting and more about sustaining. Starting is visible. It feels decisive. It carries energy. People notice beginnings, a new direction, a bold announcement, a visible step forward. These moments create momentum, and momentum matters. But momentum on its own is unstable if it is not supported by something deeper: sustained identity. This is where many people slow down, not because they lack discipline, because they have not yet fully decided who they are willing to become over time. They like the idea of boldness. They like the idea of thinking bigger. They like the idea of being taken seriously. But when those ideas begin to require consistent behavior, day after day, especially in quiet conditions where no one is watching, something inside them starts negotiating again. It says, just for today, reduce the standard. Just for today, delay the effort just for today. Choose the easier version. And that just for today pattern repeated enough times quietly reshapes identity. Because identity is not what you claim, it is what you repeat. This is the stage where a person must confront a more refined challenge. Not whether they can act boldly once, but whether they can become someone for whom bold, aligned action is normal. That shift requires a different level of commitment, not emotional commitment, behavioral commitment. You no longer treat your standards as suggestions. You treat them as agreements. Agreements with yourself about how you will show up, even when conditions are not ideal. This does not mean rigidity. It means reliability. You become reliable in the way you think, reliable in the way you move, reliable in the way you respond to pressure, reliable in the way you carry responsibility. Reliability builds trust, first internally, then externally. And trust changes the way life interacts with you. Because once people begin to sense that you are not fluctuating based on mood, that your effort is not random, that your communication is not unstable, they begin to take you more seriously. Not because you demanded it, because your pattern made it logical. This is one of the most powerful shifts available to a person, moving from occasional strength to predictable strength. Predictable strength is what creates presence over time. It removes the question mark. People do not have to wonder which version of you will arrive. They know. And that knowledge changes how they engage with you. They give you more responsibility, more space, more attention, more weight in decisions. But that external response is secondary. The deeper value is internal. Because when you become predictable to yourself, your own mind relaxes in a new way. You no longer have to negotiate every action. You no longer have to debate whether you will follow through. And that knowing frees energy. Energy that was previously spent in internal argument becomes available for execution, creativity, and precision. This is where boldness becomes quieter but stronger. It is no longer about proving that you can act. It is about proving that you can sustain. Sustain effort, sustain clarity, sustain standards, sustain movement even when novelty fades, because novelty always fades. Every new direction eventually becomes routine. Every exciting beginning eventually becomes repetition. And repetition is where identity is either built or diluted. If you treat repetition as something to escape, you will constantly chase new beginnings without ever building depth. If you treat repetition as the place where strength is forged, you will begin to appreciate a different kind of progress. Less dramatic, more permanent. You become someone who can carry a vision across time. That is rare. Many people can generate ideas. Fewer can carry them long enough for them to become real. Carrying something long enough requires emotional regulation. Because along the way you will experience doubt. You will question your direction. You will compare your progress to others. You will feel moments of fatigue that have nothing to do with your actual capacity and everything to do with the weight of sustained effort. In those moments, the untrained mind looks for escape. It looks for reasons to stop, to pivot too early, to reduce the standard, to convince itself that the original goal was unnecessary. But the trained mind responds differently. It does not assume every emotional shift is meaningful information. But it does not treat every doubt as a signal to change direction. It observes. It stabilizes. It returns to the process. This is what emotional discipline looks like in practice. Not suppressing feeling, not dramatizing feeling, relating to feeling with perspective. Understanding that your emotional state is influenced by fatigue, by environment, by recent outcomes, by internal narratives, by physical condition. And not all of these signals require immediate action. This perspective creates space between feeling and behavior, and that space is where stronger decisions live. Without that space, A person becomes reactive. They move when they feel strong. They retreat when they feel uncertain. They accelerate when they feel validated. They slow down when they feel unseen. That pattern creates inconsistency. But an inconsistency weakens both results and identity. But when you build space, your behavior becomes less dependent on momentary state. You still feel, you still experience fluctuation, but you are no longer fully governed by it. You can continue even when the internal climate is imperfect. That is where real strength becomes visible, because life will not always meet you with ideal conditions. Opportunities will come when you feel unprepared. Challenges will arrive when your energy is already stretched. Moments that matter will not always wait for your confidence to stabilize. So, you must become someone who can move intelligently without requiring perfect internal alignment. This does not mean forcing yourself into exhaustion, but it means learning to operate with enough steadiness that you do not abandon your direction every time the internal environment shifts. This steadiness is built through practice, through finishing what you start, through returning after interruption, through maintaining standards across different emotional states, through choosing long-term coherence over short-term relief. These repetitions create a deeper form of self-respect, not the kind that depends on outcome, the kind that depends on consistency. And consistency compounds, not always visibly at first, but internally, it builds a stronger baseline. Your thinking becomes clearer because it is less disrupted. Your actions become sharper because they are less hesitant. Your communication becomes more direct because you are less concerned with managing perception. And gradually the gap between your potential and your expression begins to close. That is when others start to feel the difference more consistently, not as a sudden transformation, as a steady signal. You become easier to rely on, easier to follow, easier to trust in moments that require clarity. And over time, that reliability creates influence. Again, not through force, through stability, because people tend to align around what feels stable in uncertain environments. They look for the person who does not collapse under pressure, the person who does not inflate under praise, the person who does not disappear when things become difficult, the person who continues. That kind of presence carries weight, and weight is what makes a person hard to ignore. Not volume, not performance. Weight, earned through repetition, through alignment, through the decision to stop negotiating with your own growth. This is where another shift becomes necessary. You must begin to see discipline not as restriction, but as expansion. At first, discipline can feel limiting. It asks you to say no, to focus, to repeat, to delay certain comforts. But over time, discipline creates space. Space for better thinking, better work, better relationships, better opportunities. It removes the chaos that competes with your attention. It removes the inconsistency that weakens your identity. It removes the friction that comes from living below your standard. And in that cleared space, a larger life becomes easier to build. Not effortless, but cleaner, more direct, more aligned. This is the phase where your life begins to reorganize around your deeper intent. Not perfectly, but progressively. You start to notice that your time is less scattered. Your decisions are less reactive. Your energy is less diluted. You become more selective about what you allow into your environment, more protective of your focus, more deliberate with your commitments. And these shifts, though subtle, create a powerful effect. They increase your capacity, your ability to handle more without becoming overwhelmed, your ability to think clearly under pressure, your ability to act without constant internal resistance. And capacity is what allows bold movement to scale. Without capacity, boldness becomes short-lived. With capacity, boldness becomes sustainable. And sustainability is what turns moments into identity. This is the deeper goal, not a single bold move, A life that can carry boldness consistently. A mind that can think beyond its current circumstances without collapsing into doubt. A body that can tolerate the tension of growth without retreating into comfort. A presence that reflects internal order rather than internal conflict. That is how you move from being occasionally impressive to becoming steadily impactful. That is how you move from being noticed once to becoming hard to ignore over time. At this stage, something subtle begins to change. You are no longer trying to become bold, you are trying to become precise, because boldness without precision eventually creates noise. It creates movement, but not always direction. It creates effort, but not always impact. And as you move into a larger life, direction begins to matter more than intensity. You cannot afford to spend your best energy on actions that do not compound. You cannot afford to speak in ways that create confusion instead of clarity. You cannot afford to carry habits that dilute your effectiveness while convincing yourself they are harmless. This is where refinement becomes the priority, not expansion alone. Refinement, the process of removing what weakens your signal and strengthening what carries weight. Most people underestimate how much of their limitation comes not from lack of ability, but from lack of refinement. They do many things reasonably well, but they do not do the right things with enough depth, consistency, and clarity for those efforts to accumulate. So their progress feels slow, not because they are stuck, because they are spread. Spread attention, spread effort, spread identity. And when you are spread, you're easier to ignore, because nothing about your behavior creates a strong enough signal for others to register clearly. Refinement changes that. It forces you to decide. What matters enough to deserve your focused energy? What skill, if sharpened, would significantly change your trajectory? What form of communication, if improved, would increase your impact across multiple areas of life? What habits, if removed, would free up meaningful capacity? These questions are not theoretical. They are directional. They help you concentrate your effort into fewer, stronger channels. And concentration is power. When a person concentrates their effort, their presence sharpens. Their work improves. Their thinking deepens. Their results begin to reflect a clearer identity. And clarity is what makes people recognizable. You begin to stand for something, not in a loud or performative way, in a consistent way. Your standards become visible. Your priorities become evident. Your behavior becomes easier to interpret. And when people can interpret you clearly, they can respond to you more effectively. This is where influence begins to grow naturally. Not through force, through legibility. You become legible. Your intentions are not hidden behind vague language. Your decisions are not diluted by constant reversal. Your effort is not disguised by distraction. You become someone whose actions tell a consistent story. That story matters because people orient themselves based on patterns. If your pattern is inconsistent, they hesitate. If your pattern is unclear, they overlook. But if your pattern is strong, they adjust. They take you more seriously. They listen more closely. They begin to expect a certain level of quality from you, and expectation, when it aligns with your actual standard, becomes a powerful advantage because it creates momentum outside of your own effort. It creates an environment that reinforces your identity. But that only happens if your internal standard remains stable. If you begin to compromise that standard frequently, the signal weakens again. So refinement is not a one-time decision. It is an ongoing discipline. You continue to remove what is unnecessary. You continue to strengthen what is essential. You continue to align your actions with your deeper intent. This is where many people face a new form of resistance. Not the resistance of starting, the resistance of narrowing. Because narrowing feels like loss. When you choose to focus deeply on fewer things, you must let go of other possibilities. You must accept that you cannot pursue every interest at the same intensity. You must tolerate the discomfort of leaving certain paths unexplored, at least for now. That can feel restrictive, but in reality, it is liberating, because scattered effort creates the illusion of opportunity while reducing actual progress. Focused effort reduces immediate variety, but increases long-term capability. And capability is what expands your options later. This is an important distinction. You are not limiting your life by focusing. You are investing in a stronger version of yourself that will be able to handle more complexity in the future. Without that foundation, more opportunity often leads to more chaos. So the disciplined person learns to choose depth over constant expansion. They ask, where does my effort create the highest return? Where does my attention produce meaningful growth? Where does my work begin to compound? Then they commit, not casually. Seriously, they give that area enough time, enough energy, enough repetition to allow results to emerge. And during that period, they protect their focus. They reduce unnecessary commitments. They become more selective with conversations. They stop offering their attention to everything that asks for it, because attention is not neutral. Every time you give it away, you are shaping your internal state. You are reinforcing certain patterns. So, a person who is serious about becoming hard to ignore becomes very intentional about where their attention lives, not rigid. Intentional. They can still be flexible, still responsive, but they are no longer easily pulled into every distraction. They have a sender, and that sender allows them to return quickly after interruption. This ability to return is critical, because life will interrupt you. Unexpected demands, shifts in environment, moments of fatigue, periods of lower motivation. All of these will happen. The question is not whether you can avoid interruption. It is whether you can return without losing your direction. Most people lose more time in the delay after interruption than in the interruption itself. They drift. They hesitate. They tell themselves they will restart tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes another delay. This is where precision matters. You reduce the gap between interruption and return. You do not wait for perfect conditions to resume. You re-enter the work as soon as you are able. Even if the first step back is imperfect, even if your focus is not yet fully restored, because returning quickly maintains continuity. And continuity is what allows effort to compound. Without continuity, every attempt feels like a restart. And constant restarting is exhausting. It prevents depth. It prevents momentum. It prevents identity from stabilizing. So you train yourself to return. Again and again, that repetition builds resilience. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that allows you to stay on a path long enough for it to matter. And as you do this, something else begins to happen. You become more aware of your own patterns. Not in a judgmental way, in a practical way. You notice where you tend to lose focus, where you tend to avoid difficulty, where you tend to reduce your standard. And instead of ignoring these patterns, you adjust for them. You create conditions that make the stronger behavior easier to access. You remove triggers that lead to distraction. You build routines that support consistency. You design your environment in a way that aligns with your goals. This is not over-optimization. It is intelligent support, because relying solely on willpower is inefficient. Supporting your behavior with structure increases reliability, and reliability, repeated over time, creates trust. Trust in yourself. And trust is what allows you to move with less hesitation. Because hesitation often comes from uncertainty about your own follow-through. When you trust that you will act, your decisions become cleaner. You do not spend as much time debating. You decide and move. That movement creates feedback. Feedback creates learning. Learning improves your next move. This cycle is what drives growth, not perfection, iteration. And iteration requires you to tolerate imperfection, to act before everything is resolved. To accept that clarity often emerges through motion, not before it. This is another point where people hesitate. They want full clarity before acting. But full clarity is rarely available at the start. It becomes available as you engage. So the disciplined person adjusts their expectation. They do not wait to feel completely certain. And they move with sufficient clarity and refine as they go. This reduces delay. It increases speed of learning. And it builds confidence based on evidence, not assumption. As this process continues, your identity becomes more stable. You are no longer defined by occasional effort. You are defined by consistent behavior. You are no longer trying to prove something in isolated moments. You are building a pattern that proves itself over time. And that pattern becomes visible. Others begin to see it. Not because you announced it, because it repeats. Consistency is visible, even when it is quiet. People notice the one who keeps showing up with quality, the one who maintains standards, the one who does not disappear when things become difficult, the one who refines instead of abandoning, and over time, that consistency becomes reputation. Reputation is not built in a single moment. It is built in accumulation. And accumulation is what makes you hard to ignore, because you are no longer relying on a single impression. You are creating repeated contact with your standard. And repeated contact builds recognition. Recognition builds trust. Trust builds opportunity. Opportunity expands your range, and that expansion feeds back into your identity. You become someone who can carry more, handle more, create more. Not because you forced it, because you built it, step by step, decision by decision, refinement by refinement. This is the deeper layer of growth, where boldness becomes structured, where thinking bigger becomes directed, where identity becomes stable enough to support a larger life. Why there is a final transition that determines whether everything you have built remains personal or becomes visible at scale. It is the transition from private strength to public expression. Up to this point, much of your growth has been internal. You have clarified your thinking. You have strengthened your discipline. You have reduced fragmentation. You have built consistency. You have refined your standards. You have learned to move with more steadiness. All of this matters. Without it, anything visible would collapse under pressure. But now, another question emerges. Will you allow what you have built to be seen clearly? This is where many people hesitate again, not because they lack ability, because visibility introduces a different kind of exposure. When your work becomes visible, it can be evaluated. But when your voice becomes clearer, it can be challenged. When your standards become visible, they create expectation. And expectation can feel heavy if you are not prepared to carry it. So even capable people sometimes remain partially hidden. They share selectively. They express cautiously. They keep their strongest thinking contained, not out of strategy, but out of a subtle reluctance to be fully registered. This is understandable, because being seen clearly removes a layer of protection. It removes ambiguity. And ambiguity can feel safe. If people do not fully see you, they cannot fully judge you. But they also cannot fully engage with you. They cannot fully trust your direction. They cannot fully respond to your value. So, remaining partially hidden has a cost that becomes more significant as your capacity grows. At some point, you must decide. Is the safety of partial visibility worth the limitation it creates? Or is it time to become more legible, more direct, more expressed? This does not mean becoming exposed in an uncontrolled way. It means becoming intentional about how you show up. Intentional expression is different from impulsive exposure. It is measured, clear, aligned with your values. It reflects thought, not reaction. And because of that, it builds trust rather than confusion. This is where communication becomes central. Not just what you do, how you express what you do, how you explain your thinking, how you present your work, how you carry your presence in conversation. Many people underestimate how much their impact is shaped by communication. They assume that if their work is strong, it will speak for itself. Sometimes it does, but often, clarity of expression accelerates recognition. It helps others understand what you bring. It helps them place you in the right context. It reduces friction in how your value is perceived. This is not about self-promotion. It is about reducing unnecessary ambiguity. If your thinking is strong, but your communication is vague, your impact is limited. If your standards are high, but your expression is inconsistent, your presence feels uncertain. So, part of becoming hard to ignore is becoming easier to understand. You speak with more structure, more precision, less filler. You avoid over-explaining. You avoid under-explaining. You aim for clarity. And clarity requires practice. You will not always say things perfectly. You will refine over time. But you begin. You stop hiding behind incomplete expression. You stop assuming others will infer your meaning. You take responsibility for making your ideas legible. This shift alone can change how you are perceived, because people tend to engage more deeply with what they can grasp. Clarity invites engagement, confusion creates distance, so you refine your communication. At the same time, you refine your boundaries, because increased visibility often brings increased demand. More requests, more opinions, more opportunities, more noise. If you do not have boundaries, your attention will fragment again, and fragmentation weakens everything you have built. So you become more selective, not closed, selective. You choose where to invest your time, where to engage, where to step back, while where to say no. This is not selfish, it is necessary. Because your ability to sustain a larger life depends on protecting your core, your focus, your energy, your standards. Without protection, expansion becomes overload. With protection, expansion becomes sustainable. This is where many people struggle. They want growth, but they resist the constraints that growth requires. They want more opportunity, but they do not want to limit distraction. They want greater influence, but they hesitate to define their boundaries clearly. But growth without constraint is unstable. So you accept the trade-off. You accept that becoming more focused will reduce certain forms of flexibility. You accept that holding a higher standard will require you to say no more often. You accept that clarity will sometimes create friction with people who are comfortable with your previous ambiguity. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of transition. You are moving from a smaller identity to a larger one. And not everyone will adjust at the same pace. Some will understand, some will not. But your responsibility is not to maintain universal comfort. It is to maintain internal coherence. Because coherence is what sustains you. As you move through this phase, another important shift happens. You stop measuring your progress only by external response. You begin to measure it by internal stability. Are you thinking more clearly under pressure? Are you acting more consistently across different emotional states? Are you maintaining your standards when it would be easier to lower them? Are you expressing yourself more directly? Are you returning to your focus more quickly after interruption? These are stronger indicators of growth than immediate recognition, because recognition can lag, but internal stability compounds. And as it compounds, your external results begin to align. More opportunity, more responsibility, more trust. Not all at once, but progressively. And when it happens, it does not feel like luck. It feels like continuation, like the natural extension of the person you have been becoming. This is an important point, because many people want the moment where everything changes. the moment where they are suddenly seen. But in reality, that moment is usually the result of many smaller shifts that have already taken place. By the time others notice, you have already changed. You have already built the habits, the thinking, the standards, the structure, the presence. So when the opportunity arrives, you are ready to carry it, not perfectly, but sufficiently. And that is enough, because readiness is not perfection. It is preparedness, the ability to respond without collapsing, the ability to adapt without losing direction, the ability to continue without losing coherence. This is what makes a person reliable at a higher level. And reliability is what allows your influence to expand, because people trust what is stable. They return to what is consistent. They invest in what feels grounded, so you continue. You do not assume the work is finished. You refine further, you adjust, you learn, you strengthen. You remain open without becoming uncertain. You remain confident without becoming rigid. You remain ambitious without losing perspective. This balance is what sustains long-term growth, not extremes. Balance. And as you hold that balance, your presence becomes more established. Not loud, not forced. Established. You enter spaces differently. You speak differently. You decide differently. And others respond differently. Not because you demanded attention, because your pattern made you difficult to overlook. This is the outcome of everything you have been building. Not attention for its own sake. Recognition that aligns with your actual capacity. Responsibility that matches your preparation. Opportunity that reflects your consistency. And from here, the path continues, because growth does not end. It evolves. Each level brings new demands, new refinements, new challenges. But now you have something that matters more than any single outcome. You have a structure, a way of thinking, a way of acting, a way of sustaining. And that structure allows you to keep expanding without losing yourself. That is the real achievement, not just becoming hard to ignore, becoming someone who can carry that reality with steadiness. In the end, becoming hard to ignore is not really about other people. It may look that way from the outside. It may seem like the goal is recognition, visibility, influence, respect. And yes, those things matter. They affect the opportunities you receive, the rooms you enter, the responsibilities you are trusted with, the level at which your work can operate. But beneath all of that is something deeper and far more important. The real shift is internal. It is the moment you stop organizing your life around self-reduction. The moment you stop speaking beneath your actual clarity. The moment you stop confusing caution with wisdom in places where courage is required. The moment you stop asking your potential to remain hidden simply because your older identity feels more familiar. That is the true threshold. And once you cross it, even quietly, life begins to feel different. Not easier in every way, but cleaner, more honest, more directed. Because there is a special kind of exhaustion that comes from living below your real standard. A person can carry that exhaustion for years and not fully understand its source. They may call it lack of motivation, burnout, restlessness, distraction, a fading sense of meaning. But often the deeper issue is that their effort and their deeper capacity have drifted too far apart. They know more than they are acting on. They can see more than they are willing to say. They are capable of more than they are allowing themselves to attempt. And that gap creates pressure. A private pressure, the pressure of unrealized force. This is why the work you have just walked through matters. It is not about becoming louder. It is not about becoming harsh. It is not about building an image that intimidates people or collecting attention as proof of value. It is about becoming congruent, becoming someone whose thinking, actions, standards, and presence begin to agree. Because once they agree, you stop leaking energy through contradiction. you stop spending so much strength on second-guessing, apologizing, over-explaining, delaying, diluting, softening, retreating. You start using that strength to build, to decide, to refine, to contribute, to lead yourself with steadiness. And that is where your real power begins, not in force over others, in integrity within yourself. That is what gives weight to a voice. That is what gives credibility to effort. That is what makes a person feel grounded in a room, even before they say much. So, if there is one thing to carry forward, let it be this. A bigger life is rarely built by accident. It is built through a series of internal permissions and external behaviors that gradually reinforce one another. You permit yourself to want more honestly. You permit yourself to speak more clearly. You permit yourself to stop shrinking your standards for the comfort of others. Or you permit yourself to become more disciplined, not as punishment, but as respect. And then you translate those permissions into structure, into repeated action, into cleaner decisions, into stronger boundaries, into the daily refusal to live as though your future must remain shaped by old hesitation. That process changes you, not all at once, but decisively. Because every time you act in alignment with the stronger version of yourself, you leave evidence in the mind. Evidence that you can be trusted with more. Evidence that discomfort does not have to control your direction. Evidence that your ambition can be ethical, measured, and real. Evidence that visibility can be handled. Evidence that you can carry responsibility without becoming rigid, and pressure without becoming reactive. That evidence matters more than motivational intensity ever will. Intensity fades, evidence stays. And over time, evidence becomes identity. That is why the work has never been to perform confidence. It has been to build self-trust, to build a nervous system that can stay steady while stretching, to build a pattern of behavior your own mind can believe in, to build enough consistency that your internal voice becomes simpler, calmer, and stronger. I said I would move, and I moved. I said I would raise the standard, and I held it. I said I would stop waiting for perfect conditions, and I began anyway. That kind of internal record changes everything. It changes how you carry yourself when opportunities appear. It changes how you speak when something important must be said. It changes how you interpret challenge, no longer as an immediate threat to identity, but as part of the terrain of growth. And that reframe is essential, because the path ahead will still include uncertainty. There will still be moments where the next move is not fully obvious. There will still be seasons where your effort is not yet matched by visible reward. There will still be friction, doubt, fatigue, adjustment. But now, you know something more useful than certainty. You know how to remain aligned within movement. You know how to think bigger without drifting into fantasy. You know how to move bolder without becoming reckless. You know how to become more visible without losing your center. That is maturity. That is strength. And that is rare. Rare not because these principles are hidden, but because many people admire them more than they practice them. Like, they want the outcomes without the repetitions. They want the identity without the disciplines that make it believable. They want recognition without the internal reorganization that allows recognition to be carried well. You have a different task now, not merely to understand these ideas, to embody them quietly, consistently, without drama, without needing constant applause, without turning growth into performance, because real growth often becomes most powerful when it is stabilized before it is announced, when it is built into the fabric of your daily life so deeply that others begin to notice the difference before you feel any need to explain it. They notice the steadiness, the clarity, the precision, the lack of wasted motion, the stronger standard. The way your presence now carries decision instead of uncertainty. And this is how the title becomes real. Think bigger. Not as an act of self-inflation, but as an act of honest expansion. Move bolder, not as emotional aggression, but as disciplined willingness. Become hard to ignore, not by chasing attention, but by becoming so aligned, so clear, so structured, and so consistent that your life begins to carry unmistakable signal. That signal will not reach everyone. It does not need to. You are not trying to become universally approved. You are trying to become unmistakably serious in the places that matter. And serious people change rooms. They change standards. They change outcomes. Sometimes through large decisions, often through repeated small ones that accumulate until the person who once hesitated can no longer be mistaken for the person they used to be. So, from here, the invitation is simple. Review your life honestly. Where are you still reducing yourself? Where are you still waiting for permission? Where are you still using intelligence to explain delay instead of produce movement? Where are you still carrying a stronger standard privately than you are willing to embody publicly? Choose one place, not 10. 1. And begin there. Raise the standard. Clarify the move. Protect the focus. Tell the truth. Complete the work. Hold the boundary. Return after interruption. Repeat until the new behavior stops feeling like an exception and starts feeling like your nature. Then, continue. Because this is not about one breakthrough. It is about becoming a person whose identity can sustain growth. A person whose ambition is anchored in responsibility. A person whose confidence comes from evidence. A person whose presence reflects order instead of conflict. A person who no longer asks life to remain small enough to feel safe. If you can become that person steadily and sincerely, then many things begin to shift. Not perfectly, not instantly, but meaningfully. And when they do, you will understand something that only practice can teach. The most powerful change was never the attention. It was the moment you stopped ignoring your own strength.